What's up, Clean Freaks? Hank Walsh here in studio for another episode with our Beyond Clean 2024 Expert Series on Rigid Scopes. Welcome back to the studio, Kurt.audette.
Hey, how's it going, Hank?
It's going good. We talked a little bit too long last episode, and we ran out of time on manual cleaning. Important. No surprise, because that's a critical piece of this puzzle, like we started that episode. But there's a very important topic that we decided to push into a full episode this time on the topic of rinsing and drying in this whole endoscope conversation. It is one of the hottest topics out there today, outside of maybe that sterilization piece that we alluded to. We'll talk about that next week or on the next recording. But yeah, so today we're going to start where we left off. The scope has been manually cleaned. Now, where does the industry conversation take us on this?
Yeah, such an important topic. This is where we generally get feedback from the clinicians as to a failure point for us. And what I mean by that is, hey, why do I see water spots in the image? What am I looking at on this eyepiece? Why is the illumination not as bright as it should be in the clinical field? So after we've manually cleaned, assuming that we have mixed the chemistry correctly, that we have manually cleaned it and soaked it for the appropriate time that's designated by the provider of our chemistry, then the next process is rinsing. And there are different requirements for different manufacturers. And what I want to really clearly delineate between is this rinsing process is different than the high-level rinsing process. So we use a different type of water. Some manufacturers use a different type of water after manual cleaning than they would for post high-level disinfection. And the terms that we hear most oftenly used, with the AAMI standards that are out there, utility water, potable water, critical water. Some have used deionized, reverse osmosis, distilled, all these different terms. There are different requirements, and each manufacturer has their own. But typically, in general, they follow the guidance from the AAMI standard. So it could refer to filtration, hospital filtration, and there are components that go into that. And I know you have some really great people on your expert series that speak to water quality. I've seen a couple of them.
Right.
I'm not going to begin to go there. They're super. I've actually took so much away from them. The goal for me is to help you understand what needs to be done. So optically, yes, number one, we got to make sure the lenses are clear and free of any kind of residual chemistry. And a lot of times what you'll see is, whether it's in the clinic doing the cleaning, the manual cleaning and rinsing, whether it's in SPD or a workroom, there are some scenarios where folks believe that it's okay to just rinse a product off under a faucet, and sometimes pre-clean that way. There are some manufacturers who allow for that, but there's a risk. If I'm rinsing a product off that's been decontaminated, and that product has a metal structure to it, which endoscopes do, you can have that debris actually fly up, and if you're not wearing protective PPE, there's a risk to the person performing that particular cleaning process. Now with rinsing, we want to make sure it's fully submerged, because the goal is to remove the chemistry, remove the biofilm, bioburden that was left behind in the manual cleaning process. And if we don't put it in a sink where it's fully submerged, what's going to happen with that residual waste? It ends up in the walls of the sink. It ends up on whatever you're using to rinse it with. Whereas if it's fully submerged, it ends up going down the sink drain. So now we're reducing cross-contamination. Our hope is to, then use clean water, I'm just going to use that term for now, to remove any deposits. So just talking about rinsing, manual rinsing is one thing. And I know I'm jumping ahead a little bit, Hank, but I want to speak to it now. I hear a lot of times I'm autoclaving my scopes and I see deposits on the proximal and distal faces. So that can go into the water quality conversation. It can go into the manual cleaning. conversation. Were they not doing it correctly? Is the autoclave suspect? Is it the water quality that's suspect? I would encourage you, and I know, again, I saw various different resources where you can have a vendor come in, do water quality testing. But the goal is to remove not only the chemistry, but also the biofilm microbial life.
So let's talk drying now, because the rinsing portion, as you mentioned, and even like going back to the chemical piece, and we mentioned last episode, if you're not diluting your chemical correctly, you could have had too much chemical, which makes it harder to rinse. And then you end up with those deposits, as you alluded to. So yeah, there's a lot of contributing factors, but let's just say for the purposes of the process here, we have effectively rinsed. We follow the soak times or rinse however many numbers the IFU has required. We're using the proper water. And now we've got a rinsed scope, but it's not a dry scope. Is that a problem?
How many times have we heard everything can be undone that was performed by pre-cleaning, manual cleaning, and rinsing if the scope isn't dried correctly, because now we're harboring bacteria. So as quickly as possible, we want to get that scope dried off. From there, I've seen different facilities use warming cabinets, drying cabinets, and there are some concerns with these cabinets. One is temperature, another is time. Because if we leave an instrument in one of these cabinets for a longer period of time, could it compromise the epoxies? Could it compromise the optics? Who knows? It's tough to do that type of testing. So there are concerns around using cabinets like that. So I'm not saying not to do it. I'm just saying consult with your manufacturers to determine if that's something you can do. If we have a lumen scope, then we have to consider the new AAMI standard that's saying we have to dry the lumen for 10 minutes. So it used to be 2. Now it's 10 minutes. And, some of the manufacturers IFUs have these 10-minute requirements, and some of our staff are saying, are you kidding me? But it's a requirement for us. So we have to follow those standards. So drying is super critical right now. It's tough to test all the scenarios to say, couldn't we dry it for this period or dry it? But again, you have experts to speak to that too, so I don't want to jump in too far there.
Is the current solution then for those IFU requirements that are coming out for those scopes, it's compressed air, and so it's not expecting a staff member to stand there for 10 minutes with the little air gun. It's usually some other kind of cabinet solution or some kind of connection that you kind of referenced that would allow them to kind of drop the scope off, that airflow begin, and then they can continue through the process.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Hank. Thanks for bringing me back there. So there are devices out there that obviously they come at a cost. So there are cabinets that have filtrated air that you can circulate. So if I'm in a clinic, urology, head and neck, wherever you are, you can buy those cabinets which will circulate the air, clean air. They also have devices for lumen scopes where you can just hook up some tubing on a Lure port and walk away. I know we do it here for our final inspection group where we just hook the device up and we're just flushing air for 10 minutes. So there are those opportunities. Absolutely 100%.
Well, the call outs here on this episode, I think, are really clear. There is new guidance. There's IFUs that may or may not be updated with specifics around the drying, and maybe so for the airflow and whatnot that we were just referencing, but the drying cabinets, for instance, the time, the temperature, the length, etc. So all of that is a lot of moving parts that clinicians, really need to take away from this episode and say, hey, if I haven't asked questions, I should probably start asking questions now about this process, especially if you're seeing any kind of scope damage. So if you have questions about this drying piece or the rinsing piece that Kurt has brought up, that's why we put his contact information in the description of every show. So you're going to see his email address as well as a link to his LinkedIn profile. Get connected, reach out. That's why he's here, and that's why we're having these conversations. So we're going to bring Kurt back on the next episode to dive into HLD and sterilization of these scopes, because drying's not the end. We've got some more steps and some more pieces to this puzzle. So hang with us here and make sure you're subscribed if you're not already, tell your friends. And until we talk to you again on the future episode, keep fighting dirty.